evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome. That's much better. I welcome all of you back to another Rage video where tonight, ladies and gentlemen, another national anthem reaction time once again. And this one is actually going to be one of the more interesting ones and something that I've actually had no real intention of doing otherwise, but then originally, because I didn't exactly know what I wanted to say about it, but then I also gave it some thought and thought to myself, yeah, actually, that sounds like a good idea. So this is going to be the European Union International Anthem. And before we get to that, let's, for those a little unfamiliar, I kind of actually want to talk us through a little bit about the history of the European Union, because without the actual proper context, it would be very, very difficult to talk about sort of what it was devised for, why people wanted it, and sort of basically the mess that England has been left in ever since 52% of the country decided we were better out of the Union. You know what? Take it up with them, not me. It was the very first time I ever got to vote in anything resulting in a huge decision like this. And of course I voted to remain, because of course we were going to be better off. But you know what? There you are. That's basically how it is. So don't come crying to me. I knew exactly what was... Okay, but let's just... Before we get too off topic, let's get back on topic. So, history of the EU. Pioneers. The following visionary leaders inspired the creation of the European Union we live in today. Without their energy and motivation, we would not be living in the sphere of peace and stability that we take for granted. From resistance fighters to lawyers and parliamentarians, the EU pioneers were a devised group of people who held the same ideas: a peaceful, united, and prosperous Europe. Beyond the pioneers described below, many others have worked tirelessly towards and inspired the European project. This section of the EU's pioneers is therefore a work in progress. So let's walk through a timeline of how did we get here. So here we go. 1945 till 1959. Peace in Europe and the beginnings of cooperation. How post-war cooperation in Europe led to the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, the signing of the Treaties of Rome, and the birth of the European Parliament. So we're talking very specifically about the end of the Second World War, the building of the wall in Berlin, and let's just go through this, because I think this actually we should do this. We should go through the history of the Union, and then so this is less going to be about the anthem, and more going to be about what it's supposed to represent, what it means, because outside of things that I can do translated into English, and outside of the things that I know very, very well, this is going to be a bit more in depth, because since I don't have to do a translation for this video, it means that we can go into as much depth as we'd like. So there we go. With the aim of ending the frequent and bloody conflicts that culminated in the Second World War, European politicians begin the process of building what we now know today as the European Union. The European Coal and Steel Community, founded in 1951, is the first step in securing a lasting peace. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome establishes the European Economic Community, or the EEC, and a new era of ever closer cooperation in Europe. This period, however, also sees the emergence of a Cold War that divides the continent for more than 40 years. You're not wrong there. Now, 8th of May 1945, the end of World War II in Europe. The Second World War ends in Europe. The continent is devastated, millions of people are dead, injured, or displaced. 6 million Jews have been murdered in the Holocaust. 4th of April 1949, NATO is created. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is established, an intergovernmental security alliance between the United States, Canada, and 10 Western European countries. By 2020, NATO has 30 members, including 21 EU countries. 5th of May 1949, the Council of Europe is established. 10 Western European countries create the Council of Europe to promote democracy and protect human rights and the rule of law. The European Convention on Human Rights comes into force on the 3rd of September 1959. 9th of May 1950, a plan for new political cooperation in Europe. French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman presents a plan for deeper cooperation. He proposes integrating the coal and steel industries of Western Europe. Later, the 9th of May is celebrated by the European Union as Europe Day. So, if you want to know exactly when to celebrate, 9th of May is your answer for Europe Day. Thanks to Robert Schuman. 18th of April 1951. Based on the Schuman Plan, 6 countries sign a treaty to run their coal and steel industries under a common management. In this way, no single country can make the weapons of war to turn against others. As in the past, the 6 are Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The European Coal and Steel Communities comes into being in 1952. 25th of March 1957. Building on the success of the Coal and Steel Treaty, the 6 founding countries expand their cooperation to other economic centres. They formalised this by signing 2 treaties, creating the European Economic Community and the European Atomic Energy Community. These bodies came into being on the 1st of January 1958. And we can see already here, you got, sorry about that. Of course, we got Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Italy, and Corsica is here, and, bollocks, I know exactly what this is. I know, of course, it's meant to be part of Italy, but it'll come to me. I know that Elba is somewhere like along here, but was Elba a region of Italy, or was it owned by the French? We'll find out at some point. I'll look into it. 19th of March 1958. The first meeting of the European Parliamentary Assembly, a forerunner of today's European Parliament, is held in Strasbourg, France, with Robert Schuman elected president. It replaces the Common Assembly of the European Coal and Steel Community and changes its name to the European Parliament on the 30th of March 1962. And, of course, if you do want to see further information, make sure to check out the Schuman Declaration, the text of the Treaty of Rome of 57, and historical archives of EU institutions. Now, 1 or 2 comments are probably needed here, is that, bear in mind, I've got it right here as well. Yeah, on Saturday, the 24th of June, 1950, President Harry S. Truman, enjoying a quiet weekend at home in the Midwest, he was alerted that that Korea was basically at war, and again, that's part of basically this period is sort of like during the beginnings of the Korean War. But this is just for the sake of context for like what else was going on in the world. But we're going to keep it focused to specifically what's happening with the Union. Now, this is of course the history. We move on to 1960 to 1969. The swinging 60s, a period of economic growth. The 1960s is a good period for the economy, helped by the fact that the EEC countries stopped charging custom duties when they trade with each other. They also agreed joint control over food production, so that everybody now has enough to eat. May 1968 sees student riots in Paris, and many changes in society and behavior become associated with the 68 generation. 3rd of May 1960. The European Free Trade Association, the EFTA, is created to promote free trade and economic integration between certain countries not in the European Economic Community, such as Austria, Denmark, Norway, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. By 2020, the EFTA members are Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. August 1961. The communist government in East Germany builds a wall across Berlin. It becomes a symbol of the separation of Eastern and Western Europe during the Cold War. It would also be something of like a very definitive split between those who would be devout followers of communism. I don't quite remember on the top of my head exactly who was Russia's president, but there's you may remember the famous phone call that then President John F. Kennedy had with Russia's president about basically back the fuck away from the wall, and basically they just sort of very tactfully retreated, among other things that certainly happened during Kennedy's. You have to admit, again, for those who do know, Kennedy had certainly a lot to do during his rather short tenure as president, but it was one of those things, eh? 30th of July 1962. The first common agricultural policy gives EEC countries joint control over food production. There is enough food for everyone, and farmers earn a good living. The unwanted side effect is overproduction. With mountains of surplus produce since the 1990s, priorities have been to cut surpluses, raise food quality, and promote sustainability. 20th of June 1963. The 6 member countries signed the Eurodale Convention to promote cooperation and trade with 18 former colonies in Africa. Today, the EU has a special relationship of this kind with 79 countries in Africa, the Caribbean, and Pacific regions and is working to build a stronger partnership with Africa to tackle challenges common to both continents. 8th of April 1965. The treaty merging the executives of the three communities, the European Coal and Steel Community, the European Economic Community, and Euratorum, is signed in Brussels and enters into force on July the 1st, 1967. From now on, the European communities will have a single administrative arm, the Commission, and a single executive, the Council. And then, of course, we move into the student riots in Paris in May 1968. Rioting by students and workers in France shakes the very foundations of the state. Milder student protests occur in other European countries. They reflect frustration as governments as well as protests against the Vietnam War and the nuclear arms race. 1st of July 1968. The 6 EEC member countries remove custom duties on goods imported from each other, allowing free cross-border trade for the first time. They also apply the same duties on their imports from outside countries. Trade among these 6 and with the rest of the world grows rapidly. August 1968. Soviet tanks crushed the short-lived Prague Spring, a fledgling democracy in Czechoslovakia. And yeah, for those who are interested, and again, for those relevant to what we know about Putin's invasion of Ukraine, is that there were certainly a lot more different types of invasions that were happening not just across the Prague Spring, but also across the world as well. And I don't necessarily remember if it was like Czechoslovakia or if it was another nation in particular that was under the threat of invasion, but I'm sure we'll cut into it. Now, Denmark, Ireland, and the United Kingdom joined the European communities on the 1st of January 1973, raising the number of member countries to 9. The Arab-Israeli War of October 1973 triggers an energy crisis and economic problems in Europe. Democracy spreads in Europe with the overthrow of the dictatorships in Greece, Portugal, and Spain. Regional policy starts to transfer huge sums of money to create jobs and infrastructure in poorer areas. The first direct elections by citizens of members of the European Parliament take place in 1979. 1970s. The European communities adopt laws to protect the environment. Again, if you want an idea of how far this goes back, there you go. It was the 1970s when they sort of seemed to acknowledge that it wasn't so much like climate control, but the idea of just environmental protection seemed the agenda, certainly. Introducing the notion of the polter pays, many environmental NGOs are formed. 1st of January 1973. And then, of course, we mentioned again, this is when they go from 6 to 9 members. And this, of course, being, Ireland, the United Kingdom, Denmark, and, basically all of here being Denmark. So, good job. They're gaining in numbers. Certainly hope we stay with them till the very end. 1973, the oil crisis hits Europe. Following an Arab-Israeli war in October, Middle East oil-producing nations impose big price increases and restrict sales to certain European countries. This creates economic problems throughout the EEC. And interesting enough, you may remember when the Ukrainian invasion began, is when oil prices and certainly petrol prices and diesel skyrocketed in the UK as well. So a lot of problems that these things do have knock-on effects, believe it or not. You know what I mean? 10th of December 1974. To show their solidarity, leaders of the EEC agreed to set up a major new fund under European regional policy. Its purpose is to transfer money from rich to poor regions, to improve infrastructure, attract investment, and create jobs. The European Regional Development Fund is created the following year. 1974 to 75. The overthrow of the Salazar regime in Portugal and the collapse of military rule of Greece in 1974, together with the death of General Franco of Spain in 1975, marked the end of these dictatorships in Europe. The three countries commit themselves to democratic government, an important step towards qualifying for future membership of the European communities. June 1979. European citizens directly elect the members of the European Parliament for the first time. Previously, members were delegated by national parliaments. Members sit in pan-European political groups, not in national delegations. Now we move into the 1980s, and again, this is when we see the collapse of communism, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, basically 10 years of Margaret Thatcher, well, really in full swing at this point, mass unemployment in the United Kingdom and across Europe. I don't think things were much better either. The Polish trade union, Solidarność, and its leader, Lech Walesa, become household names following the Gdańsk shipyard strikes in the summer of 1980 for workers' rights and political change. In 1981, Greece becomes the 10th member of the European communities, and Spain and Portugal following 5 years later. The end of the decade sees the collapse of communist regime in Central and Eastern Europe. August 1980. Shipyard workers in the Polish city of Gdańsk, led by Lech Walesa, strike for more rights. Other strikes follow across the country. The government capitulates and Solidarność is created as an independent trade union in September. The government gradually reasserts its power and imposes martial law in December of 1981, ending Poland's brief encounter with people power, but the seeds have been sown for later. 1st of January 1981, Greece becomes the 10th country to join. And of course, it has been eligible to do so since the military regime was overthrown and democracy restored in 1974. Now, I don't know about you, but is there a specific limit for how long after a period of time when your country, like, it ceases to become, run as a single party dictatorship and is eligible to join? Is there like a specific time period, or can it be run immediately after that sort of the reign of terror ends? Is there like a date for that sort of thing? But we'll I might have to look into that a little bit later as well. 28th of February 1984. Computers and automation are changing the way we live and work. To stay at the forefront of innovation, the Esprit program launches in 1984, the first of many research and innovation programs at European level. 1st of January 1986, and this is when Spain and Portugal joined the EU, and we're now up to 12 members. February 1986. Although customs duties disappeared in 1968, trade is not flowing freely across the borders between member countries. The main obstacles are differences in national regulations. The Single European Act launches a vast 6-year program to sort out these and thus create a single market. The Act, which comes into force on the 1st of July 1987. It also gives the European Parliament more say and strengthens the power of the European communities in environmental protection. So obviously this is when more countries were given a say and a lot more of a democracy within the Democratic Union was supposed to come into play, about making everything streamlined. It's sort of like it almost sounds like a little bit similar to what like Napoleon did, with a lot of like inaccurate and very, very bizarre laws that were like not commonplace and not thoroughly practiced across France, and how he just sort of wrapped all of those together and created one centralized code of law across the whole of France. I think actually it might be exactly because of that. 13th of June 1987. The Ramses program is launched to fund university students wishing to study in another European country. Since then, the program has given over 10 million people the chance to study, train, volunteer, or gain work experience abroad. I like that. That's, of course, that's fantastic. And even more was the 9th of November 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall falls, and border between East and West Germany is opened for the first time in 28 years. Germany is united after more than 40 years, and its eastern half joins the European communities in October 1990. I don't know how long this lasted, though, because, of course, they just came together as Europe as we know it, as well as Germany as we know it today. And we move into the 90s. A Europe without frontiers. In 1993, the single market is launched with the 4 freedoms of free movement for people, goods, services, and money. The 1990s is also the decade of 2 treaties: the Treaty on European Union, Maastricht Treaty, and in 1993, and the Treaty of Amsterdam in 1999. Austria, Finland, and Sweden joined the EU in 1995. And a small village in Luxembourg gives its name to the Schengen Agreement that will gradually allow people to travel to large parts of the EU without passport checks. 1991. In the Balkans, Yugoslavia begins to break apart. The ensuing wars cause tens of thousands of casualties and last for much of the following decade. 7th, I've heard about a lot of that, and it's again one of the sort of things that kind of doesn't get brought up all that much, because this also accompanies the things that I think Albania probably could have been allowed to join the EU at this point, because they were served under like so many years of like, well, of course, remember this is when obviously communist rule was dissipating from certainly Eastern Europe, but again, we'll have to come back to this. And you have to remember is that Albania and is sort of like northwest of Greece, but that's besides the point. 7th of February 1992. The Treaty on European Union is signed in Maastricht in the Netherlands. It is a major milestone setting clear rules for the future single currency, as well as for foreign and security policy, and closer cooperation in justice and home affairs. The European Union is officially created by the treaty, which enters into force on the 1st of November 1993. 1st of January 1993. The single market and its 4 freedoms are established: the free movement of people, goods, services, and money. Hundreds of laws have been agreed since 1986, covering tax policy, business regulations, professional qualifications, and other barriers to open frontiers. However, the free movement of some services is delayed. 1st of January 1994. The European Economic Area is created. The agreement establishing the European Economic Area, the EEA, enters into force, extending the single market to countries in the EFTA. Today, people, goods, services, and capital can move around the EEA's 30 countries, brackets EU 27 plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. Switzerland does not take part in the EEA, but does have access to the single market. 1st of January 1995, and this is of course when Austria, Finland, and Sweden joined the EU. That means that the EU now has 15 members that now cover almost the whole of Western Europe. Of course, the only exceptions would be the likes of Poland, sort of like more, well, got Austria here, Italy, well, Greece still here has yet to join. Then we've got, of course, Romania, Albania, Ukraine, and I'm not entirely okay. I'm gonna be kicking myself, but we're talking things like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. I think it might be Latvia, or it could be a little bit further down south. On the 26th of March, 1995, the Schengen Agreement takes effect in 7 countries: Belgium, France, Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. Travelers can move between these countries with no passport controls at the frontiers. By 2021, 26 countries are part of the passport-free Schengen area, including Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. 2nd of October 1997. The Treaty of Amsterdam is signed. It builds on the achievements of the Maastricht Treaty, laying down plans to reform the EU institutions, give Europe a stronger voice in the world, and devote more resources to employment and the rights of citizens. It enters into force on the 1st of May 1999. And the 1st of January 1999. The euro is introduced in 11 countries for commercial and financial transactions only. Notes and coins will come later. The first euro countries are Austria, Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. Denmark, Sweden, and the United Kingdom decide to stay out for the time being. And I know Bulgaria, I think, still keeps a hold of it's not the lev, but it's they keep a hold of their own currency as well. But remember, they don't. Well, at this point, Bulgaria is not a part of the EU as we know it. Now we enter into the 2000s. We're getting there, ladies and gentlemen. But I'm enjoying this. It's very fascinating. The euro is now the new currency for millions of Europeans. The 11th of September 2001 becomes synonymous with international terrorism after hijacked airliners are flown into buildings in New York and Washington. Countries begin to work much more closely together to fight crime. The split between Eastern and Western Europe is healed with 10 new countries joining the EU in 2004, followed by Bulgaria and Romania in 2007. A financial crisis hits the global economy in September of 2008. The Treaty of Lisbon provides modern institutions and more efficient working methods. 26th of February 2001. EU leaders signed the Treaty of Nice. It aims to reform the institutions so the EU can function efficiently after reaching 25 member countries and prepare for the next major group of new members joining. It comes into force on the 1st of February 2003. September 11, 2001. Hijacked airlines are flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon building in Washington. Nearly 3,000 people died. The EU countries stand firmly alongside the United States in their fight against international terror. 1st of January 2002. European notes and coins become the legal currency in 12 countries. Well, 12 EU countries, I should say. Greece joined the Eurozone in 2001 and more follow after 2002. Printing, minting, and distributing them is a major logistical operation. Notes are the same for all countries. Coins have one standard side while the other carries a national emblem. 31st of March 2003. As part of its foreign and security policy, the EU takes on peacekeeping operations in the Balkans. Firstly, in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, now known as North Macedonia, and then in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In both cases, EU-led forces replace NATO units. 1st of May 2004. Cyprus and Malta joined the EU along with 8 Central and Eastern European countries: Czechia, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia, finally ending the division of Europe after the Second World War. In 2004, that's how long all of this was going on for, bear in mind. And again, remember, this is membering countries, this is new European countries, and what we see down here is candidate countries and potential candidates. This is when Bulgaria, Romania, and Turkey were coming into effect as well. 29th of May to the 1st of June 2005. Voters in France and the Netherlands reject the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe, which was signed by the 25 EU member states in October 2004. 1st of January 2007, two more countries from Eastern Europe, Bulgaria and Romania, joined the EU, bringing the number of member states to 27. And as before, you can see the map here. And again, countries that are pending are Croatia, North Macedonia, and Turkey. 13th of December 2007. The 27 EU countries signed the Treaty of Lisbon, which amends the previous treaties. It is designed to make the EU more democratic, efficient, and transparent, and thereby are able to tackle global challenges such as climate change, security, and sustainable development. All EU countries ratify the treaty before it enters into force on the 1st of December 2009. And finally, September 2008. A major financial crisis hits the world economy. The problems start with the mortgage loans in the United States. Several European banks also experience difficulties, and the crisis leads to closer economic cooperation between EU countries. Now, again, I'm going to say from my point of view, is that I remember a lot about news coming, because when I was only about like 10 years old when I first heard about the credit crunch that began in England. Well, certainly I only really heard about it during 2008. And again, I didn't really understand a great deal of it. And I also didn't understand why there were so many news stories that were coming from Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's worth noting is that it's the sort of thing you get yourself involved in if you want to make sense about why things like this happen or what goes on. Or again, it's to know what happens now, you have to know what happens in the past, because the past will always shape the future. Now we move into the 2010s, a challenging decade. The global economic crisis strikes hard in Europe. In 2012, the European Union is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Unrest and wars in various countries lead many people to flee their homes and seek refuge in Europe. And again, remember, this was during a multitude of things such as the Syrian civil war, ongoing battles with the Taliban, and bear in mind is that you want to speak about challenging, but wait until we get into the 2020s, because, well, we'll get to that, because we still got to go through all of this as well. The EU is faced with the challenge of how to take care of them, while safeguarding their welfare and respecting their human rights. Climate change is at the top of the agenda, and leaders agree to reduce harmful emissions. Croatia becomes the 28th member of the EU in 2013, but in a referendum in 2016, the United Kingdom votes to leave the EU. True, sadly. 2010. Following the economic crisis that began in 2008, several countries encounter problems with public finances. The 16 EU countries that use the euro back a plan to help them deal with their deficits. The EU helps several countries confront their difficulties and establishes a banking union to ensure safer and more reliable banks. 10th of December 2012. The European Union receives the Nobel Peace Prize at a ceremony in Oslo. The prize recognizes the EU's contribution over 6 decades to promoting peace, reconciliation, democracy, and human rights. 1st of July 2013. Croatia joins the EU and becomes its 28th member. And these are all the ones now pending: Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Montenegro, Turkey, and Serbia. November 2015 onwards. A number of European cities, including Paris, Brussels, Nice, Berlin, London, and Barcelona, become the target of terrorist attacks. I remember when this happened too. I remember when there was a football match and there was also a rock concert, and then when attacks happened in Paris. And I remember I was like glued to listening to again, for reference, I was about 17 at the time, and I was just sort of like, my attention was solely fixed on anything developing coming from the news, because you needed to know exactly what was going on, or because it wasn't long after this when we heard about a lot of terrorists who are using vans and other means of transportation to carry out attacks on Tower Bridge, among other places across London. God, it's insane, the fact that it doesn't even it's like 8 years later and it doesn't even seem that long ago either. 12th of December 2015. At a UN conference in Paris, 195 countries conclude a new agreement on climate change, with the EU playing a pivotal role. It comprises an action plan to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. December 2015. By the end of 2015, over 1 million asylum seekers have arrived in Europe, many fleeing civil war in Syria and in need of international protection. EU leaders step up efforts to strengthen external border controls and reduce the number of asylum seekers by cooperating with neighbouring states such as Turkey. And bear in mind, Turkey was going through many sorts of conflicts of their own between Syria and Iran, because again, because of where Turkey is situated geographically, just north of Syria, there would have been a lot of concerns about, among other things, probably further conflict being caused. But again, I think it was more so like in realms of like Damascus, as well as, well, that's sort of like the southern west regions of Syria. But then again, when your entire country is going through a civil war, I'm not entirely sure if it matters where in the country you are. It's the fact that fighting will happen and continue no matter where it is. I mean, it's not as if, during the English Civil War, there was much doubt about where in the country you were. What mattered was which side were you on. 23rd of June, okay, here we go. 23rd of June 2016. In a referendum in June 2016, 52% of voters in the United Kingdom vote for the UK to leave the European Union after more than 40 years as a member. The UK departs officially on the 31st of January 2020. Happy birthday to me. I would have turned 22 by that point. Oh dear. December 2019. Toward public concern about the climate crisis increases. Driven by a growing and active international youth movement, a new commission takes office with its sights firmly set on making Europe climate neutral by 2050 through a new growth strategy, the European Green Deal. Some would argue that in 27 years' time, that might be too late, but we'll have to wait and see on that. I mean, again, decisions like this are not just simply done like at piecemeal, but these things have got to be devised. These things have got to be organized with scientists and nations to come on board as well. It's not just because of the youth of today have decided that's what's most important, then that's what's most important. Now we entered into the short period of the 2020s, so let's go. January of 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic triggers a major public health emergency and economic slowdown. The EU and its member countries work together to support healthcare systems, contain the spread of the virus, and secure vaccines for people in the EU and beyond. EU leaders agree the largest stimulus package ever financed from the EU budget, with the focus on a green and digital recovery as the EU works towards climate neutrality by 2050. A tall order in so many years. 31st of January 2020. The UK leaves the EU after 47 years of membership, opening a new chapter in its relationship with the EU. April of 2021. Launch of the Conference of the Future of Europe. The EU launches the year-long Conference of the Future of Europe in 2021. the unprecedented exercise in participatory democracy offers EU citizens a unique opportunity to have their say and help shape the EU's future. Something that we don't have anymore. Well, again, we haven't had since the 31st of January of 2020. But again, we could have had this, but people decided we were better off not having a say. And finally, February of 2022. The EU and its international partners firmly condemn Russia's unjustified and unprovoked war of aggression. The EU adopts a series of hard-hitting sanctions against the Russians and provides financial, humanitarian, military, and other assistance to Ukraine. And I remember immediately when this first came out, because the case was entirely that basically the whole world was going to start going to war against Russia one by one. There was even some suggestion that even at my old place of work that I was going to be called up to actually fight, to fight against Putin. But no such thing emerged, to say the least. And hopefully what we sort of tried to convey during this history lesson, if you will, of the European Union is what they stood for, what was their vision towards a Europe that was built on human rights, laws, protection, financial aid, financial protection, to shape a better, freer, a more concise Europe from dictatorship, inhumane leadership, and a world in which we shall never forget the heroes who died during both world wars, and that we work together so that this sort of thing will never happen again. It would have actually been very, very interesting to know exactly if the question of returning to the EU would ever come up again in the United Kingdom, because there's a lot of things to be said about, to be fair, I voted to remain, and that position has simply never shifted an inch since. And I have no reason to suggest what on earth is going to convince me that we're better off no longer in the EU. But again, without wanting to drag this video out for literally years, we are going to salute and give homage to the European Union on Europe Day, because it is time to stand and show your respect for the European Union International Anthem, which of course would be a part of Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, is Ode to Joy. I must say, ladies and gentlemen, actually, you wouldn't believe it, but that was actually my very first time in actually listening to Beethoven's Ode to Joy. And I'll tell you what exactly I think makes it make perfect sense for an anthem for such a large unit as the European Union. It's the fact that you'd be surprised actually what sort of different tracks would mean across very different across situations like these. And in the case of the European Union, it seems to suggest that it's almost calling people from far and wide to be united. And if this had like some sort of like obligatory video, I almost imagine it would be from as far west as Ireland to as far east as Romania and Albania. I reckon it's meant to be something that almost encapsulates all the nations of Europe, and it's supposed to be a very symbolic and representation of peace and unity and the working together for a better, stronger Europe together. That's what I feel like this is all about. It's about being together, not being separated. It's about being united, we stand. And of course, divided we fall is something I would come into question about why anybody even thought that the idea of leaving the EU was a great idea at all. It wasn't. It really wasn't. And again, without wanting to drag this out into things about why this is, it's the sort of thing that makes me feel like if I like just straight up emigrated to France and lived out the rest of my life there, or even changed my national identity so I could actually be French just to be part of the European Union again, I wouldn't mind trying that, because I think I could offer a lot to the conventions and the ideologies of what the European Union was set out to do than thinking that we were better off outside of it. Because here we are, ladies and gentlemen, so many years later, and does it seem like the UK is prospering because of Brexit? Well, I certainly don't. Do you? We'll just about wait and see about that, because, well, I still can't think about it. It should also be worth mentioning that under certain governments that, well, you probably know what they are, but let's just pretend we don't. Europe has been the defeat of such leaders like Margaret Thatcher, Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, and it would probably be even the same for the likes of Rishi Sunak. I know Richie believes that Europe is not going to defeat him, but how exactly you could take on over 25 nations and thinking that we're better off not being with them is a very, very good idea that is going to blow up massively, because it's just not going to happen. But who am I to say no? You know, who am I? Which is I to which is own and all that. But what a beautiful anthem it turned out to be, and I like that. Well, what can I say? I just like that at all. So anyway, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed like a very truncated history of the European Union and the Ode to Joy. Please make sure to leave all your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below on what you guys felt of Ode to Joy for yourselves and the short history lesson of the European Union. Hopefully you've managed to learn a little bit something today on Europe Day, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.